Our experience is so versatile that it is extremely hard to describe. In order to make sense of this constant flow of processes which together make up our cognition of the world, living beings have invented conceptual thinking, which includes the ability to generalize and use symbols. The idea of a symbol, the idea that one thing can be used to refer to another thing, is indeed to be considered one of the greatest inventions of the evolution of life. However, conceptual thinking has its limitations and falls short to reveal some of the most fundamental characteristics of the universe. Not being aware of it, we will be led astray. Exploring both the field of science as well as the field of humanities, we will see how our mother tongue defines the way we think and what can be done to emancipate ourselves from the boundaries of our cultural predetermination. First of all, we will explore the fundamental mechanisms of thinking and its relationship with language. This done, we will observe what are the weaknesses of conceptual thinking and how we misperceive the reality. After that, some real-life implications are discussed. Let's start by defining two key terms, relative truth and absolute truth. We can experience things on many levels and describe them with different concepts. Let's examine an expensive wristwatch. Firstly, it can be seen as a luxurious symbol of status. Secondly, just a watch, a useful tool. Thirdly, a conglomeration of its parts, a mechanical device. Fourthly, a collection of subatomic particles. All these views are true, but they describe different levels of experience. The level of the subatomic particles is the closest to its real nature, thus it is approaching the level of absolute truth. In everyday use, however, we must see a watch as a watch in order to know how to use it. This can be called the level of relative truth. Relative truth is the reality described by conceptual thinking. Absolute truth is the way things really are, which is far beyond the reach of rational thought. Language belongs into the level of relative truth. Furthermore, language itself conditions the way we perceive the world. The relationship between thinking and language has interested linguists for a long time. Some researchers believe that thinking comes first, and only after a concept is created, we find a word to describe it. Others, however, maintain that language itself conditions the way we think and perceive the world. Let's have a closer look to two of those theories. The first one, developed by Lev Vygotsky, is left unfinished because Vygotsky passed away at the age of 38. The theory states that thinking and language are interdependent. They emerge together through social interaction. According to Vygotsky, cognition develops through interaction, i.e. socio-cultural development. He states that as little children, we only have elementary mental functions: attention, sensation, perception, and memory, which are developed through interaction with a more knowledgeable other, also known as MKO, with a higher level of ability and understanding. A more knowledgeable other has to guide the child through a zone of proximal development, which lies in between the more elementary skills and more advanced skills, and where the child must receive the most sensible instruction. Interaction with a more knowledgeable other helps a child develop higher mental functions like independent thinking and learning. For example, a 4-year-old girl tries to put together a puzzle. Her father, a more knowledgeable other, is helping her through interaction. If she was alone, she would not be able to put it together, lacking the necessary advanced skills. But as her father helps her, she goes through the zone of proximal development and acquires necessary skills to be able to put it together on her own the next time. The second theory, known as SapirWhorf Hypothesis, puts more emphasis on language as the predeterminer of cognition. The hypothesis itself is divided into two: linguistic determinism and linguistic relativity. Linguistic determinism, as the more radical form of the theory, states that language determines thought. For instance, if there was no grammatical tenses in one's language, their experience of time would be very different. Most modern linguists, however, tend to favor linguistic relativity as a less radical approach. Linguistic relativity suggests that while cognition and language are connected, the effect of language on one's cognition is small. For example, imagine a girl pushing a boy. If you imagine the girl on the left side and the boy on the right, chances are that your mother tongue goes from right to left. If you imagined it the other way around, it's possible that your language goes the other way, for example Hebrew. Studies have shown that people find it easier to recognize and remember shades of colors for which they have a specific name. Another example is Daniel Evert's study analyzing conception of numbers in the Brazilian Piraha people. These individuals could not conceive numbers beyond 1 and 2. After this, all numbers are grouped under the term many. Even after being taught in the Portuguese language for 8 months, not one individual could count to 10. Furthermore, many studies have documented the differences in identity formation in bilingual versus monolingual children, who have often reported a very different sense of self depending on language use. It was also discovered that those students used different languages for different tasks. Other studies have come up with even more unexpected findings. It is said that at first the Native Americans just ignored European ships because they had no word for them. A research from Yale University points out that people with a highly scientific worldview cannot see miracles. In the study, electromagnetic fields were used to make a vase levitate. It turned out that those scientists were just incapable of seeing the vase in the air. Not that they started to search for logical explanations for this event, they simply could not admit it happening. The following conclusion can be drawn. Our rational thinking is based on the language we speak. Thus, it is extremely hard to perceive something you cannot name or categorize. People educated in biology will see much more in the forest because they have acquired the right terminology. They know what to look for. The same holds true about psychology. By learning the terminology about the mind and mental states, we start to distinguish between a much greater variety of feelings and emotions. In English, there are only few words for describing our feelings. In Sanskrit, however, the terminology is much richer, and thus a person skilled in Sanskrit may experience his mind on a much richer way. Language also influences the way how we relate to nature. In indigenous languages, there are often no clear separation between humans and their surroundings. In English, however, the words he, she, and it divide the universe into human beings and all the rest, including everything from gorillas to minerals. In reality, a human being and a gorilla are indistinguishable compared to the differences between apes and minerals, but mankind has a desire to be special. English is a good language for exploiting the nature, because all which is referred to as it can be seen as a resource. When white people colonized America, they wanted to get rid of their local languages, because those languages saw animals and all the environment as equal to mankind, and thus did not consider man as the king of nature. In olden times, our language depicted us as a part of the whole universe. The same magical power which was sensed in the shaman's chant could also be heard in the sound of the wind or in the song of the bird. Everything had a spirit. We had reverence towards animals who we knew to be our ancestors. There was a sense of unity with the trees, the soil, the stars, and all the creatures. To restore this sense of unity, perhaps a new pronoun should be introduced, a pronoun which refers to all living beings. To a certain extent, we can just extend the use of he and she, for example, if referring to a dog, but many species are not divided into two sexes as we are. We shall have a neutral pronoun which would include everything from human beings to ladybirds, distinguishing them for lifeless objects like stones. When exploring linguistic relativity, we saw that bilingual children tend to choose different languages for different tasks. This might show that different languages are good for specific purposes. For example, English has a relatively easy grammar, thus it is great for everyday use and business. German and Sanskrit offer clear rules for forming new terms by using prefixes and suffixes, thus they are suitable for philosophers who need to build up accurate terminology. In Japanese, one sound can refer to very different meanings, allowing poets to encode multiple hidden meanings behind the literal interpretation of the poem. Now, let's restate the most essential points so far. Thinking and language are closely connected, influencing each other. It is easier to perceive things we can name. We start to notice much more when we have acquired the right terminology. Language also contributes to our relations with nature as a whole. All languages have their own benefits. The one most suitable for business may not be the best choice for poetry. This may seem to be a fascinating idea, but what about practical implications? The idea of conditionality has led to a magnificent breakthrough in science, especially in biology. In the early days, biologists observed living organisms, or even their body parts, as separated objects. Nowadays, a new network-based approach has been introduced. We observe all beings as parts of a bigger ecosystem, focusing on how they relate to each other and to their environment.
This methodology gives a much more realistic picture and is also needed to observe human impact on the biosphere. Let's take a look at the following example. In Africa, a poison named DDT was widely used to prevent the reproduction of mosquitoes. The poison served its purpose, but unimaginable side effects occurred. Mosquitoes are an important part of a wide food network. Through them, the poison spread across the entire ecosystem and even far beyond the shores of Africa. DDT has now been found in the eggs of penguins as well as in the milk of polar bears. It has traveled tens of thousands of kilometers in different maritime organisms and accumulates now in the bodies of the top predators. We must admit that Earth is one undividable whole which cannot be understood just by observing its parts. The same principle also applies to our everyday life. All our mental problems are caused by ignorance towards changeability and conditionality. To exemplify this, let's look at the causes of depression. The essence of depression is the denial of changeability. We think that our problems and the entire situation are unchangeable and thus there is no hope. Seeing the conditionality helps us to understand that the problem has arisen in dependence of certain conditions and it is bound to change as the conditions change. Having gained such insight, it is easier to accept the situation and work for the solutions.
When we are angry, we consider the annoying person to be one object who has an intrinsic evil nature. If we manage to see him as a human being just like us, a complex network of different psychological processes, including both good and evil, we will be able to find out the reasons of his annoying behavior and perhaps do something about it. Our mind is an extraordinarily powerful tool. Psychologists say that only 10% of our happiness is dependent on what actually happens with us. The rest 90% is created by our own thoughts. This can be illustrated with the following story from the Pali Canon. There is a man who gets stuck with an arrow, yet he shoots himself with another one. The first symbolizes the physical pain, which to a certain degree is inevitable. The second arrow represents the psychological pain caused by our own anger and feeling of injustice. We may not be able to avoid physical pain, but we can avoid psychological discord. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. To sum up, let's restate the most crucial points once more. Thinking and language are closely connected. It is easier to perceive things we can name. We start to notice much more after acquiring the right terminology. Our mother tongue also contributes to our relations with nature. Language distorts reality like a lens. It tends to leave behind the most inherent principles of existence, namely impermanence and conditionality. When we take the object out of the net of relationships, which gives it a meaning, no statement made about the object can be totally accurate.